everybody, and welcome back to another episode of How Did We Not Know That? I'm Nat,
I'm Jack.
and today Jack is going to be talking about the Harlem Renaissance.
All right, hey. Okay, so before we get started, I do have a few things to say. So first, to our new listeners, please don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at HDWNKT. Not How Did We Not Know That? The tag is HDWNKT. And Facebook, which is at How Did We Not Know That? Also, if you're watching us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to us. It will really help us out. And lastly, do check out our Patreon page. And if you would like to become a history hero where you can get a shout out and exclusive access to episode polls. Also, if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, please rate and leave a review if you can. We love hearing from you. Okay, so as Nat said, I am going to talk about the Harlem Renaissance, which happened around 1918, 1920 to the 1930s. So to talk about the Harlem Renaissance, we actually have to go back and talk about the Great Migration, because the Great Migration was this huge movement in the United States of African Americans from the South to the North, and that was from 1910 to 1920. And there are a few different reasons for that, and the first of which was World War I actually occurs from 1914 to 1918, and then the U.S. actually got involved in the war around 1917. But when the war was happening, immigration was falling during this time, so there were less workers around in the North, and so companies in the North were trying to recruit Black workers in the South to fill the open roles. Also in 1915 and 1916, there were natural disasters in the South that put many Black workers and sharecroppers out of work. But the most important reason a lot of African Americans were leaving the South was because the South, for our viewers outside of the United States who aren't familiar, was the location of the Confederacy. And the Confederacy was the side of America, well, I guess they committed treason, but they were fighting to keep slavery legal in the United States. So they seceded, which means they separated from the Union, and the Union is the United States today, and they attacked. And then, yeah, the Confederacy is still widely debated as to what they were fighting for today, but slavery is a part of it, whether you want to acknowledge that or not. So yeah, so because they were fighting for slavery, there were extremely vicious racists, white supremacists, and constant lynchings very concentrated in the South. And the images from this time are literally horrific. This isn't even like in slavery. This is like slavery is over. As we talked about in our Juneteenth episode, it ended in 1865. But slavery is over, and there's still like ridiculously vicious racists in the South. And the images are literally like stuff that keeps you up at night. It's just like huge groups of 50 plus standing over mangled Black bodies after lynchings or massacres. It's like small children like smiling, and it's like it's like these family events and picnics. Anyways, horrible conditions. I cannot even begin to imagine the amount of fear that these people were having to go through.
And like also, sorry, I don't know if you're gonna mention this, but like a lot of people kind of blame the South and was like, oh, well, all the lynchings occurred in the South. Like, no, like they occurred in the North as well. Like up until it wasn't that long ago. It's like to like the 60s, 70s. Like I could be wrong, but it could be even more recent than that. But
no, you're right.
Everywhere, so we can't just like blame it on one certain area and be like, oh, the rest of us are okay. Like it happened everywhere. And you're right. Like it would be a family event, and people would take like postcards. I also don't know if you're gonna go into that, but like, yeah, people would take pictures and send it to families, members, and friends. And it's just like, it's disgusting. I can't even.
Also, in addition to that, Black people were unable to make a living for themselves in the South. There was the emergence of Black codes, which were restrictive laws designed to limit the freedom of African Americans and ensure their availability as cheap labor. After the end of slavery. So it was a legal way to continue their abuse. These labor contracts were very predatory. They were low paid. They didn't really have a lot of rights and negotiation. Also, black codes limited their right to vote and denied them the right to testify against whites. They were also not allowed to serve on juries, which is a huge deal. To not have government representation, not even being able to have your own rights as an American citizen.
To go off the whole jury duty thing, like, of course, like that's your right as an American citizen too. But if you're thinking about like if you're a Black American and you're being tried at court and it's only white jury, like I wonder, like, how can that not be biased, you know, and how can that not affect your sentencing? So, like, beyond the fact that, okay, like, it's your right, like, it's gonna affect the, I guess, rulings of the court, and yeah.
Right. And how is that diversity of thought? It's like the same groups of people from similar backgrounds. Anyways, and yes, Nat, you did good. I have it in here. Spoiler alert, racism was hardly any better in the North. I cannot imagine, like, Nat completely did a great job. Yeah, lynchings were not any better in the North. Discrimination was not better in the North. So by 1920, about 300,000 African Americans from the South moved north. One of the most popular destinations to move to was a place called Harlem.
Ooh.
So Harlem was a neighborhood in New York City. It was originally built for upper class white people, but due to rapid overdevelopment, the landlords were really desperate to get tenants in the area. Then we start to see middle class Black families migrate into it, which causes white people to flee. They did try to prevent more Black people from moving in, but ultimately failed. It is regarded as a Black cultural mecca and is credited, rightly so, as the birthplace of the Harlem Renaissance. So, to refresh your memory, Renaissance is a French word that means rebirth. So, the Harlem Renaissance was really the rebirth or redefinement of the Black narrative in the United States. And in order to do this episode justice, to talk about the redefinition of the Black narrative, we need to talk about what the Black narrative was before in the United States. You have to learn specifically how white Americans were portraying and perceiving Black people to the public. And I say white, and I'm going to continue to use this term because the narrative of Black people from the start of their enslavement in the United States and up until this time was defined, propagated, and distributed to the public by white Americans. This, I can't believe I have to say this disclaimer, but when I say white Americans, I'm in no way trying to make any listeners who are white feel attacked for being white. We are not responsible for what our ancestors have done. Nat and I are both half white. Yeah, but you have to acknowledge the sides of the situation and what was actually happening. You cannot ignore color in this historical event. Sorry. So
That's a great way to phrase it.
yeah. So this is really important to acknowledge and note because it's going to illustrate too, as you're going to see later, how so many white supremacy groups were able to thrive, exist, and grow during this time frame because they were using these portrayals to basically brainwash the majority of other white Americans and justify to themselves the dehumanization and mistreatment of African Americans. Nat and I could literally do a whole series talking about the plethora of racist propaganda throughout our founding that is conveniently brushed over in school because there's a lot if you start to dig. But instead, we're going to focus on two of the largest ones for right now, and the first of which is Jim Crow. And I'm going to ask Nat, what do you know about Jim Crow?
Jim Crow law, like when I think of Jim Crow law, I think about laws that enforce segregation, and just like overall discrimination and like just like I guess like it's separating Black Americans and then white Americans like in our laws and in our legislative system. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So Jim Crow laws and Jim Crow are related, but Jim Crow is actually a character. So he's a fictional character that was created by, do you want to add?
Yeah, well, yeah. So he's like not a Jim Crow, like the person Jim Crow is not a real person, but it's like this stereotypical, like really racist, like cartoon that white people like drew and like created to depict African Americans. And then, am I right?
Yeah. No, you're right. It's we'll go into the history some more. Okay. So Jim Crow, fictional character, and it was created by a white actor for minstrel shows in 1828. So this is like slavery is still legal during this time. And minstrel show was a form of entertainment that was run by white people where they depicted people of African descent while wearing what is known as blackface. So for people who aren't familiar, blackface is the practice of covering your face and skin in black substances to make yourself appear black. So these shows and practices of blackface would portray black people in a degrading light as dim-witted, evil, and then they would proceed to profit off of the dehumanization and degradation of these people. So Jim Crow was a caricature of a clumsy, dim-witted black slave, and he served as inspiration for the development of black codes and Jim Crow laws that were named after him, which were anti-black laws that were used to perpetuate racism, discriminate against, and encourage the socioeconomic oppression of black people. And then the next thing we're going to talk about to continue this joyful discussion is the Birth of a Nation film. So Nat, can you tell me what you know about it?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so Birth of a Nation. It was I guess like propaganda for the Ku Klux Klan, correct? And it basically it was just like really awful, and it justified white supremacy. Um and basically said that non-white people were like the reason for all the US's problem. Is like, oh, okay, and also like we should just have an white only country, and that's what we should strive to be.
You did a good job. It was The Birth of a Nation was supposed to tell the story of the American Civil War, but the reality is it glorified the formation and existence of the Ku Klux Klan and led to its refounding in Georgia in 1915. So I don't know if people knew this, but the Ku Klux Klan is a white supremacy group. It has been that way since its founding, and it was actually stamped down by the federal government around 1877. So they already tried to stamp it down. Because of this film, it led to the reformation of it in Georgia in 1915, and that led it to spread throughout the South.
Wow, I had no idea that the KKK it like died out. It died down and reemerged. That's
Right.
crazy. Why do you know why the federal government was?
Why they stamped it down?
Yeah.
Because it's a white supremacy group and it's
Yeah, but I guess that makes sense, but I don't know. I feel like the government hasn't done a lot. Like I'm thinking like late 1800s, like they
Yeah.
weren't really doing a lot.
This book was saying that you as a country is really dependent on the leadership at the time, right? So that's why Abraham Lincoln is widely praised for being one of the greatest presidents of all time, because at the time, it's not like everyone was like racism's wrong. No, Abraham Lincoln was like racism is wrong and we're going to do whatever it takes to like eradicate it from the United States. And because of that leadership, this is why we went into a war. If he had not felt this way so strongly, then like that war would not have happened. But imagine the splits that we have today, and that debate times that by like 10,000. That was like what Abraham Lincoln was having to go through. And the reason why we became the country we are today is because of the leadership that was in that position. I don't know where I was going with that. I was saying like
You're fine. You're fine. We just have to bring up Abraham Lincoln in every episode somehow, because
I just love Abraham. You could fight me on that. I love Abraham Lincoln. The Ku Klux Klan, also known as the KKK, is a terrorist white supremacy group formed by white Protestant nativists and Confederate veterans in 1865. This is when it was formed. It was anti-Black, it was anti-Catholic, it was anti-Semitic, it was anti-immigration. It was basically anti-anyone who was not exactly like them. So they are most well known for killing, lynching, massacring Black people, bombing their schools, and destroying their homes and businesses. And this film glorified the KKK as saviors for, quote, the helpless white minority, unquote. That was literally in the film.
Oh my God. Are you serious?
I'm not even, I was like,
minority. Oh, I don't even know where to.
I was like, how do I can't. Anyways, yeah, they portrayed Black people, again, They were not using Black people in the film, mind you. They were using white actors in blackface, and they portrayed them as predatory, scary, evil savages that wanted to rape and take advantage of white women. It also really, because I did watch this film. I don't know how I got through it. I watched it. Yeah.
What?
I watched it. Oh, yeah. I do my research, and I was like, it really portrays the slaves as being very happy, which is a very, I'm going to go on a tangent, but it's a very common thing that people, especially in the South history textbooks, United Daughters of the Confederacy rewrote Southern history textbooks, and in the state of Georgia, that textbook was used up till 1970. And what those textbooks did was play on the narrative of a happy slave. And that is an incorrect, false narrative that people use over and over, time and time again, to justify slavery and to lower the severity and horrific mistreatment of African American people.
Well, yeah, it's important to think about who's writing the narrative. It's important to think about who's writing our textbooks. Like, oh my God.
People want to talk about history books being biased. Yes, they are. And like, that's why you do multiple research and you fact check your sources. And yes, our history textbooks in the North were biased too. Believe me, I don't think I understood like the severity of what slavery meant. I don't think I understood what the Civil War meant. I don't think I understood what internment camps mean. Really empathize with that fear. Like that fear of not being able to go to sleep at night because you don't know if the Ku Klux Klan is going to come lynch your dad, lynch you. Like it's...
Well, I mean, it's hard to empathize with something that's just one paragraph in a giant textbook. So yeah. Like it's not a coincidence that like, oh, you didn't realize the severity of it because yeah, it gets like 2 sentences. So
yeah.
like, oh, by the way.
P.S. They'll like add a line that says like some slave owners were really kind to their slaves. Okay, kindness does not excuse the fact that it is immoral to kidnap people from their homes, to enslave them, to force them into labor, to rape them, to murder them, to whip that, like to torture, to abuse. That is not...
Yeah.
Like,
I don't know. Yeah.
So the film was huge propaganda with the sole purpose to brainwash white Americans and create a narrative against Black people that would further justify hate crimes against them. Maybe this was like a cinematic accomplishment at the time because people widely accepted this as historical fact. There is a scene in there that reenacted the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, which they did my boy dirty. I don't know who played Abraham Lincoln, but he looked like he was like dying before they assassinated him. I'm probably gonna take this out of the video.
No, okay, but before he was assassinated.
Yeah, I was like, who played this man? Anyways, also fun fact, not super fun, but it's a fact. So in the 1920s, fresh off of the release of The Birth of a Nation, KKK membership exceeded 4 million nationwide.
4 million?
Yeah.
Oh my God. That's so much.
It's a lot. It's
a lot.
A lot of people. Yeah. Also, a lot of fake scientific studies were written and published during this time to all the general public that would state basically that Africans were by nature inferior to whites and that they were more similar to great apes. This is quote unquote intellectual white. This is the term they used to describe themselves, and classified people of different ethnic origin with certain traits. And it also ranked them by like their closeness to intellectual white, which literally blows my mind because I don't know if this is news to anyone, but we as humans make borders. Like this is this is the first full-length episode that at least I've posted in 2 weeks, and that's not because I was falling behind on research. It's because this research was literally so horrific and depressing that I was losing a lot of sleep. And the reason why I'm so upset, in addition to just the like horrific treatment of humans that we have done and excused throughout the time, is also because there's so much in American history that they just don't tell you about in schools. And they also try to cover it up and make lighter than it is. And that is probably what hurts the most. And that's like the premise of Nat and I's show, is all about popping your own bubbles of ignorance and letting yourself understand what happened and reflect on that and make those judgments.
Like Jack and I are not trying to call out teachers. Like my mom's a teacher. We understand how difficult teaching is. I think like the root of the problem is the curriculum that teachers are being told to teach in classrooms, and like our textbooks, and what states are outlining that students have to learn every year. And like, yeah, you said like, oh, maybe it's because we're children, but like, I don't know, I'm in high school and I feel like there's no excuse. Like it needs to be updated. Every American should be educated on this. I don't know why we shouldn't. Like, it's historical facts. Like these things actually happen, and everyone should be aware of them.
Yeah. We encourage listeners to really take the time to dig into the research of anything you're interested in. And especially if you want to dig into American history, I recommend doing it when you're having a good mental health day and you're with a friend. Even if it's hard, it deserves your attention, it deserves your research time. The images are gonna let you know right now, the images are literally horrific. Yeah, just a fair warning, it's gonna be hard, but
And like also like shout out to my other white Americans listening. Like if you guys are like, oh, I feel so uncomfortable when I like learn about this. I feel so guilty. I'm like, okay, it doesn't matter. Like you have to learn about it and sit in that discomfort. Like I'm sorry, but
yeah, from one of my favorite science podcasts said something when they were covering a heavy topic like depression and whether or not antidepressants worked, and she said someone was like skewing research on a scientific study to, I guess, make the results seem less morbid. And she was like, science doesn't exist to make you feel better. And I think that can be applied to anything. Science doesn't exist to make you feel better, and history doesn't exist to make you feel good either. You have to look at realities, and then you have to, and always question it. You know, like Nat and I cross check everything that we put out in this episode. I like, and we make mistakes, and you can find new information and you can change your mind. That's what learning is all about. So, but you have to like take the time to learn.
if we all educate ourselves on these ugly truths and then we all commit to uh improving ourselves as individuals and improving ourselves as a nation, and like making sure this awful stuff doesn't happen again, and seeing how these awful things that happened in the past like are affecting everything going on today, and like really evaluating and getting into the like ugly parts of American society. Like it's like, how does like hundreds of years of this rhetoric and legislation being passed and like representation in media and news, like for hundreds and hundreds of years, is
Yeah.
affecting every American's bias. Like you're, oh my gosh, you pass it on, you pass your biases on to your children and then your children's children, and
Right. Also, I just want to thank Nat and a lot of my good friends. They know who they are. You guys have been really lovely helping me process all of this and get through it. So I appreciate you guys a lot. Shout out. Okay.
hey,
All right. So after that heavy, heavy last episode, we are now going to talk about the brighter part of the Harlem Renaissance, which is how the Black narrative changed. So during the Harlem Renaissance, Blacks had a newfound freedom to express themselves in a way that they didn't have in the South, and it was a redefinition of Black expression. Social leaders of the movement believed that art could open up the doors to economic opportunity and social acceptance. Many of these people had not been able to pursue their art and creativity to become novelists and writers and playwrights. So the first person we're going to talk about, you cannot talk about the Harlem Renaissance without mentioning this guy. His name is W.E.B. Du Bois. Have you heard of him?
yeah.
What do you know?
He's a poet, right? And he is also an activist.
Yeah, he's an actor. Yep, that's.
He wrote novels. He's an author.
Oh.
An
Okay, yeah. So W.E.B. Du Bois, he had a goal to redefine the perception of the Black person. So he was a scholar and an activist, and was the first African American to earn a PhD from Harvard University in 1895.
Ooh, I did not know that.
He literally like he was not allowed to stay on campus past 6 p.m. and had to like sit in a corner. But He got that degree.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So he also co-founded the NAACP. People who don't know what that is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And fun fact, he was mixed black and white. So he was actually able to freely attend school with white people, where he grew up in Massachusetts, which, okay, represent mixed people. Hey. um, yeah, so actually he didn't experience Jim Crow laws till he went to Tennessee in 1885 for his undergrad degree. And when he was experiencing that for the first time, it really sparked his analysis of American racism. And I was like, how have I never heard of W.E.B. Du Bois before? And I really want to read more of his work because I'm so curious. And I always wonder about how mixed people get treated then. Because how do you choose which side? Because people look different, right? And so how do the rights get organized? And I know how the rights got organized in apartheid, which is the segregation of races in South Africa, which we will cover in season 2. One of his works that he published was called The Souls of Black Folk, which was a book that elaborated on the diversity of Black experiences. And a lot of his work analyzed the effects of systemic racism in creating poverty-stricken areas in the Black community. He protested lynching and race riots and wanted to uplift the voices of the African American community. He was a huge writer who published many works and gave documentation on what it was like to be Black in America at this time. So, fun fact, this is my theory on why they didn't teach you about W.E.B. Du Bois in school. At least they didn't teach me. It's probably because when he was 93 years old, this was in 1961, he joined the Communist Party of the United States of America, which I did not realize we had a Communist Party. But if you were listening to our last episode on the Red Scare, we all know how Americans feel about that.
Yeah.
So that's probably, could be a reason why they left it out.
Wow, interesting. Okay, so then maybe that's it, like, throw back to the episode we were talking about how the NAACP was labeled as communist.
Yeah, I was thinking about that because I was like, I'm not surprised that they did that. But also with the way segregation was being enforced, of course they're going to label fighting for like equal rights as communism. The next person we're going to talk about is Langston Hughes. So have you heard of him?
Oh yeah, he's another author.
Mm-hmm. He's another American poet, activist, playwright. He wrote a piece called, quote, The Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain, unquote, which was a manifesto that called for confident and unique Black literature. So a direct quote from his book is, quote, we younger Negro artists who create now intend to express our individual dark-skinned selves without fear or shame. If white people are pleased, we are glad. If they are not, it doesn't matter. We know we are beautiful and ugly too. The tom-tom cries and the tom-tom laughs. If colored people are pleased, we are glad. If they are not, their displeasure doesn't matter either, unquote.
Wow.
So he advocated for you to present your experience as it is. The next person we're going to talk about is Louis Armstrong.
Oh, wow.
Surely you've heard of him. So he was a famous trumpet player, composer, vocalist, and actor who was one of the most influential figures in jazz music. So anyone who doesn't know what jazz music is, it is a genre that originated in African American communities in New Orleans with roots in blues and ragtime. Ragtime is like my favorite piano genre ever. I love Scott Joplin, who was a ragtime composer. My hands are too small though, so I never was able to play like a ton of ragtime.
So cute.
I know. I like kept asking my piano teacher, I was like, when can I start Maple Leaf Rag? She's like, I just don't think you can hit the octaves. And I couldn't. I could like barely reach the octaves. Yeah.
You like the press on nails.
Yeah, and I wanted to put some examples in the podcast of jazz and ragtime music for people who aren't familiar, but I'm not trying to get us sued. So I'm gonna actually link some videos to examples in our YouTube description, so check it out.
Okay,
While you're there, subscribe to us. So Louis Armstrong performed in Harlem a lot, and then his career really blossomed during this era. We're next gonna talk about Aaron Douglas. So he's known as the father of Black American art, and he adapted African techniques to realize paintings and murals as well as book illustration. He was a very, very talented artist. For African artists, when you paint something, which is like really opposite to European artists, like European artists are really realistic, at least during the Italian Renaissance, what we think of. is like you want to paint it like exactly as it is, and like still lifes look like just real. And for African artists, which I want to state too, African artists like Aaron Douglas has all the techniques as well. He can create just as like realistic paintings as you want, but African techniques are really putting life into something. So when you paint a tree, you don't just paint the tree as it is, you like breathe life into it and you give it that creativity. Okay, next on the list, Oscar Jones. Oscar Jones was the first Black filmmaker, and he made a lot of lovely Black films featuring actual Black actors, hello, playing Black people in a range of characters and personalities that are assertive, articulate, sophisticated, and it allowed Black audiences to see themselves displayed in a positive light in films. And they handled very hard subjects like miscegenation and the brutality of rape. And then if anyone forgets what miscegenation means, it was the like separation, the belief that like races should not mix at all. So that was like the miscegenation laws in Virginia in 1924 from Loving versus Virginia case that we covered in our episode called We Were Illegal, or Are We Illegal? What was it? Something about us being illegal?
Oh, we were illegal. Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about miscegenation laws, so you should check that out. Next, Josephine Baker. Have you heard of her?
She's a singer?
Yeah, she's a performer. But she also fought for racial equality by demanding in her contract that they contain non-discrimination clauses and that her audiences became integrated. These are just a few people from the movement I wanted to talk about, and there are literally so many more. The list goes on and on of all the Black artists that emerged in the Harlem Renaissance. But if you want us to cover a specific person, please email us. We also saw a rise in vibrant nightlife. It was really popular to go to Harlem for the nightlife. And entrepreneurs in Harlem realized that some white people wanted to experience Black culture without having to socialize with African Americans. So they created clubs to give the Black experience. And some of these were the Cotton Club, Small's Paradise, and Connie's Inn that had jazz and dance performers, as well as illegal alcohol because this is the time of the Prohibition. These clubs they were very controversial at the time. Some people ridiculed the existence of the clubs because they potentially exotified Black people, but other people also felt that it was a sign that Black culture was becoming more accepted.
I see.
Yeah, so there are differing opinions on these clubs. So similar to the Italian Renaissance, something that many people might not know is that artists are actually supported by patrons. The way that artists, especially like in the Italian Renaissance, it was like wealthy Europeans would pay for your art and invest in you, and that's how you can make a living. And the same thing is needed for the Harlem Renaissance. So a majority of wealth, especially at this time, is concentrated in the pockets of white Americans. And so thus there needed to be white patrons that supported these Black artists. There is something that emerged called the Harmon Awards. So the Harmon Awards were established by William Elmer Harmon, who was a wealthy white real estate tycoon from Ohio. He understood the benefit of having Black people participate in the economy. So Harmon believed that encouraging Blacks to be self-sufficient would help the country in general become more successful by getting them into the economic system. And I think this is literally so interesting because I'm like in the middle of taking a negotiation course from Yale University, just like online in Coursera. It's the one I sent you. The reason why we negotiate is because when we work together, the pie gets bigger. There aren't less slices. That was new to me. I didn't realize, like, for some reason we feel like when we're negotiating, it's like, who's going to get more of the pie? Like, no, when we work together, we can get more slices. The pie gets bigger.
Like that. I remember that I did the first like week of that course. I remember the whole pie metaphor.
And so I just think that it's so cool that he understood this concept in a time where many people have a scarcity mindset and didn't realize that if you mobilize people to become economically self-sufficient, you can, as a whole, increase a country's production and everyone benefits. When we talked about the dot-com bubble bursting, when a company has an IPO, that means that average investors can buy into it. When you buy into a share of a company, you're giving them money to take and continue building their company. So when you have more people who have the money to participate, that means more money flowing into the economy. That means a greater GDP. That means greater production. That means more chances for entrepreneurs to continue building out infrastructures and providing more jobs. You want everyone to be able to participate in the economy. Since this is not an economics episode, we're not going to get that far into it, but I am going to link that course in the YouTube description. Just like a fair warning, it's a little heavy on math, but the principles are really interesting and you can still get like a larger understanding. So this guy founds the Harmon Foundation in 1922, and with that formed something called the Harmon Awards. These awards were awarded to Black people for constructive achievement. They were awarded in sectors from business and industry, science and invention, music, education, religious service, race relations, and fine arts. So the awards range from bronze to gold, with monetary benefits ranging from 100 USD to 1,000 USD during that time, which today would have been 1,500 USD to 14,000 USD. For art shows too, their Black artists were also able to profit off of the sales of art.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
So the Harlem Renaissance was a time where Black people could shatter stereotypes, increase visibility, and uplift African voices. So much of the art was celebratory, but there were also lots of pieces that illustrated the alienation, racism, discrimination, and the discomfort of performing the Black identity in a white world. There's a concept of double consciousness, being Black and American at the same time. Playwriting contests at the time encouraged writers to write about things as they know them, saying, quote, "You do not have to confine your writings to the portrayals of beggars, scoundrels, and prostitutes. You can write about ordinary, decent colored people if you want. On the other hand, do not fear the truth, plumb the depths. If you want to paint crime and destitution and evil, paint it. Be true, be sincere, be thorough, and do a beautiful job," unquote.
Wow.
Yeah, people are diverse, right? Like, people have diverse experiences, and so you don't always have to write about like things that people expect you to write. Whatever you want to write, just be true to who you are, because you are like yourself.
Like, it's only recently where like we could have someone from like a non-white actor like being the lead in a movie that has nothing to do with like their background, and it's like, oh, just portraying them as like a normal human being, like just a normal. I'm like just thinking of like Disney Channel stuff where like,
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I saw a Disney Channel show. I don't even know what it was. It was like my sister's watching in high school, and they had an Asian character who is literally like stereotypical, super stressed out about grades, super like academic. And I was like, can't you just make her like a fellow camper? Like, why does that have to be her narrative?
yeah, writing about it all the way back during the Harlem Renaissance, like.
Yeah, one play that stood out to me in particular during this time that I was reading about in my research is called, quote, Rachel, unquote. And that was written by African-American playwright and poet Angelina Weld Grimke. And so the premise of that play, basically Rachel, the main character, is an educated, sensitive young Black woman who comes to the understanding of the harsh realities of American racism. She comes to learn that her brother and father were lynched. She then becomes depressed and vows never to have children and rejects the love of the man she loves. I think that that's such a realistic, probably, experience of women at the time. And I think women especially will go through this as well. Like, is it ethical to bring more people into this world if you know that they're gonna suffer in that way? And especially during this time, I can't imagine like wrestling with that. When the stock market crashed in 1929, this also led to the decline of the Harlem Renaissance. As you know from the Great Depression episode, we know so much. We're just learning together. This is the crash that led to the United States historical Great Depression. During this time, many people lost their money, including wealthy white patrons. So they're not investing into Black art and not going to clubs in Harlem as much. So regardless, the Harlem Renaissance created a new image of sophisticated and intellectual African Americans and gave a voice to a community that had been voiceless for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And it gave these artists pride in and control over how the Black experience was represented in American culture. And it also set the stage for the civil rights movement. So most importantly, although the Renaissance came to an end, the artwork of those artists still lives on to inspire and empower us throughout generations.
Yeah, it lives on forever. Like, yeah.
Yay. But yeah, so that's the Harlem Renaissance. Thank you for sticking with us throughout.